Hey guys, welcome to episode 6. We've got a couple new segments going on today, and we're going to be diving into some wild news stories. So let's get started. Alright guys, this segment is called Crazy News because the news is just insane sometimes. This story actually reminds me of The Twilight Zone. There's one episode I remember watching in high school where this girl is going to have surgery. She's actually trying to look more like a pig because the people around her think that this is the beautiful standard that everyone is supposed to look like. When I was younger and at that time, the lesson to be learned was about what makes something beautiful. Now that I think of that episode, I take it a little bit more literally. At what point is surgery unethical? We live in a world where adults and children alike can have healthy organs removed in the name of gender identity. The news is littered with stories of laws being enacted for or against such measures. Let's take a look at some of those headlines. So we have one where the New Hampshire Senate is considering a bill to ban gender-affirming surgeries on minors. Hospitals statewide say they don't perform these procedures. Another headline from the AssociatedPress says gender-affirming surgeries in the U.S. nearly tripled before pandemic dip, study finds. And we see all kinds of headlines about this issue all the time. But today we're going to be diving into a different sort of surgery. This is still a surgery to accommodate someone's mental ideas of themselves. But this one is for something called body integrity dysphoria, done in the name of inclusion. So let's take a look at this story. So this Daily Wire article says inclusive healthcare. Man has 2 healthy fingers amputated for body integrity dysphoria. A Canadian man had 2 healthy fingers amputated to treat his body integrity dysphoria. A case report about his procedure reveals. So apparently this man was having some concerns about his fingers. He didn't feel like they belonged to him. So they tried a few non-invasive treatments. They were unsuccessful. And he did actually receive the surgery and he actually had his fingers amputated. So at what point are we able to question the ethical nature of these surgeries? At what point do we say enough is enough? What if the patient felt their arm didn't belong to them? What about their legs? What about their internal organs? If they felt they didn't belong there, would the doctors just remove them? We already know doctors will remove healthy sexual organs to accommodate a gender change for a child. What about a person's life? What if the person feels that they should be dead? Unfortunately, there are doctors who would go that far. So this is another news story. It says the troubled 29-year-old helped to die by Dutch doctors. In January, a young Dutch woman drank poison supplied by a doctor and laid down to die. Euthanasia and doctor-assisted suicide are legal in the Netherlands, so hers was a death sanctioned by the state. And it goes on to say that she was not terminally ill and she had a psychiatric illness. So if you live in the Netherlands, you can apply for assisted suicide even without a physical debilitation. Now, of course, medical professionals should be listening to their patients, listening to their concerns, and hearing from them. This does not mean accommodating a patient's desire to harm themselves. Accommodation quickly changes from compassionate to cruel when we remove one important idea, the truth. We can accommodate preferences and desires. We can be hospitable and resourceful, but we cannot bend the truth. When we start to alter reality itself, what we call compassion is actually inflicting harm on other people. Did the doctors actually believe the fingers needed to be removed? Did the doctors actually believe this patient was incapable of having a good quality of life? Like in the Twilight Zone, the doctors there thought they were making someone ugly beautiful. when in fact they were making someone beautiful ugly. A world where reality is distorted and backwards can never be as beautiful as one where people know the truth. This is why proclaiming the truth is important. People need to know that life is worth living even when they don't feel like it or haven't felt it in a long time. People need to know reality even if their feelings are different than that reality. Bending reality to match our feelings causes harm. Our next segment shows bending ideas manifesting in a different life. Let's go into our next segment called Deep Dive. The segment called Deep Dive gives us the opportunity to focus on an issue and analyze what's behind the problem. Today we're going to focus on the issue of crime. We see many stories in the news about increased amounts of crime and increased amounts of fear. What is causing all of these crime stories? Let's begin by taking a look at the state of California. We'll start by listening in to this interview.
You can literally walk into a retail store every single day of the year and steal $949 worth of merchandise, and you will never do a minute in jail.
Is it a day or
No,
is it
no.
per time?
It's
so you could
per
actually
incident. You can go back.
So you can steal $949 and walk out of that store and go back in and do it again.
Yes. No compounding consequence. The voters, I believed, were duped because the summary and title said it was the Safe Neighborhoods and Safe Schools Act. So that's all a person looks at. If you get that sample ballot and you see this Proposition 47, the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act, I'm voting for that. Under California law, ironically, rape of the unconscious is not a violent crime. Assault on a peace officer with anything other than a fully automatic weapon is not a violent crime.
Wow.
Domestic violence, with the word violence right in the crime title, is not a violent crime. So we really truly need some truth and justice in the state of California.
Now, do you have any hopes for the future of California?
I do. The information that's been shared as a result of this effort to fix Proposition 47, I think, has gone a long way to open the eyes and the ears and the minds of California voters, and I hope it stays. The mayors of these blue cities have come out in support of the initiative to fix Proposition 47. So it's not a right-wing initiative by any stretch of the imagination.
So here's where our deep dive begins. Let's take a look at Proposition 47. On November 4th, 2014, voters enacted Proposition 47, the Safe Neighborhood and Schools Act. Proposition 47 intends to ensure that prison spending is focused on violent and serious offenses, maximize alternatives for non-serious, non-violent crime, and invest the savings generated from the new act to support elementary and high school programs, victim services, and mental health and drug treatment. Essentially, the logistics of the proposition do three things. It changes certain offenses from felonies to misdemeanors. It allows people who were convicted of the felony in the past to have their case reconsidered. And it uses funding that would have been spent on prison sentences for other programs. Now we see the fallout of this. There is some controversy over how much this law change has actually changed crime rates. However, it is quite agreed upon that crime is a huge problem in California. Let's take a look at what two police chiefs in California have to say about the consequences of Proposition 47. Some people calculate, I don't want to go over the $950, so let me steal $949 worth of property, said San Francisco Police Chief William Scott. San Diego Police Chief Shelley Zimmerman described Proposition 47 as a virtual get-out-of-jail-free card. Not everyone agrees with this assessment. This is what Charis Kubrin, a professor of criminology at the University of California, Irvine, has to say. Opponents routinely cite rising crime rates as proof that Proposition 47 is harming public safety, prompting repeated calls to repeal the measure. Yet crime rates going up, or down for that matter, tell us nothing about the source of those trends, and studies such as this one are necessary to determine any link between criminal justice reform and crime rates. So what do we know about Proposition 47? Well, I've got an article from KQED titled Proposition 47's Impact on California's Criminal Justice System. So they conducted their own investigation, and they had a few findings. First, they talk about the numbers. Shoplifting numbers reported to law enforcement have not risen since Proposition 47, but the rate of arrests has fallen significantly, and there is evidence that many retailers do not report all thefts to police. So it's true that the shoplifting statistics, according to them, have not risen the way that people might be saying, but those crimes may not be being reported, and the arrest rate has fallen. They go on to say, police and retailer response. Police and retailers have become less aggressive at engaging and arresting low-level shoplifters in recent years. So we can see between these two things that people do not feel that the police are going to respond. People don't feel the police support. They don't believe that shoplifters will be prosecuted, so not all crimes are being reported. So we can just feel that overall sense of a lack of safety. That culture where you feel like you're unsafe, you feel like nothing's going to happen to the criminal, makes criminals more bold. According to the article, about 15% of theft cases resulted in an arrest in 2013, which was the year before Proposition 47 passed. In 2022, that number had dropped to 6.6%. They also talk about misplaced blame. They say that this proposition is blamed for crimes that are really outside of what it covers. But as we discussed, criminals are now more bold. So while organized theft rings may not be directly a part of Proposition 47, this proposition has emboldened shoplifters who are now more brazen with their theft. It also talks about the felony threshold. So you heard in the video that they talked about the $949. So it is true that there are actually many other states that have a higher threshold. Actually, Texas has a much higher threshold than California does. In Texas, the threshold is $2,000 for the crime to be considered a felony, whereas in California, it's $950. So there's definitely a bigger picture as far as what is to blame than just the specific verbiage of Proposition 47, and we'll get more into that later. This article also talks about repeat offenders. It's very difficult for prosecutors to add up all of the charges to charge repeat offenders, which again is something they talked about in the video, saying that you could just commit the crime and then go back and commit the crime again. And again, this is why crimes aren't being reported. This is why criminals are more brazen. It's just this cultural feel that a crime can be committed and nothing is going to be done about it. Something else interesting is that participation in programs like rehab programs to get out of drug addiction have dropped. And that's because those crime laws have also changed. So what used to be considered a felony is now a misdemeanor. And the court used to be able to say, well, we can reduce your sentence if you will be a part of this program. But they're not doing it. So people aren't going to rehab to make an attempt to get out of drugs. They did say a positive outcome of this proposition is the money that has been reused to go to other programs. However, I have not found any metric for success for these alternative uses of the money other than that they have received more money. And I learned from my time as a teacher that the number of millions of dollars poured into a program has almost nothing to do with whether or not it's actually effective. So while the redistribution of the money is true, it carries little weight in considering how good Proposition 47 has been. So this whole issue actually reminds me of The Incredibles 2 movie. At the beginning, an evil villain is going through the town underground to steal massive amounts of money. The Incredibles are scolded for their efforts to stop him because the criminal gets away and damage is done to the city. People don't want justice. They just want happiness. The problem is, the pursuit of happiness over justice in the long run still leads to unhappiness. When criminals become bolder and law and order are diminished, people feel unsafe. And this is happening in more places than just California. In Chicago, the mayor is actually blaming car theft on car manufacturers. Let's take a look at what he had to say. The failure to install basic auto theft prevention technology in these models is sheer negligence, and as a result, a citywide and nationwide crime spree around automobile theft has been unfolding. And I think this just shows how far removed from reality you have to be to make a claim like this, that it is the manufacturer of the automobile's fault that it's being stolen. Like, that is so far removed from people's experience from the way people live their lives. Like, we can't blame the car manufacturer. There's a way that we can operate society, that we can support law enforcement so that people can keep their possessions and not be afraid that their things are going to be stolen. And actually, in Canada, the police have even recommended leaving the car keys out on the porch in order to prevent car thieves from coming into your home. So they're taking it even further and actually enabling car theft, recommending people to do that. Let's take a quick look at that. So that headline reads, Toronto police slammed for advising residents to leave car keys within easy reach for thieves to avoid violence. In both cases, the message is clear. You must accommodate the criminals. No law enforcement is able to stop them, so you shall have to learn how to live with car thieves. You see, the issue with Proposition 47 is bigger than just the proposition itself. It is this cultural shift away from law and order. It is a shift toward reducing penalties for crime. It is a shift away from justice. Scott Jennings, a Republican advisor and CNN political contributor, said, instead of being overhyped, as the opposite viewpoint suggests, there is a lack of clear understanding of why crime is on the rise. The current crisis stems directly from the left's rejection of law and order and the coddling of repeat violent offenders. The letter of the law is important, but so is the heart of the law. The enforcement of the law matters. The rhetoric for or against justice matters. Just take a look at one place doing things right. So this is an opinion piece on Fox News, but it's about crime in Florida. It says, here's how Miami Beach successfully broke up with spring break. She talks about how Florida is a popular spring break destination. People have known that Miami Beach was just a place to avoid during spring break because of how rowdy it could be, the arrests, the excessive crowds, the feeling of danger. But they were there, and things were different this time. Says a memorandum from Raquel Williams, interim city manager, a few days ago noted, while some of the measures had been employed in the past, the totality of the 2024 spring break measures was unprecedented, particularly with respect to the Miami Beach is breaking up with spring break campaign that reached a global audience and garnered an estimated 19.8 billion media impressions. I spoke with Mayor Minor about the city's success. He told me the ad campaign was instrumental to the positive outcome. The ad campaign warned people coming to vacation on Miami Beach that the city wouldn't stand for bad behavior. Just saying so helped control that bad behavior. So is it compassionate to be soft on criminals? No. Criminals do not need to be accommodated. Laws need to be enforced for the good of the community and for the good of those tempted to do wrong. This is simply a recognition of a basic biblical truth. Mankind has a propensity to sin. We cannot make our laws with wishful thinking. Real crimes need real consequences. Our next crime to investigate has some connections to 2034, A Cautionary Tale. So let's go to 2034 in the news. There was an assault in a middle school that was completely avoidable. In fact, the students had reported that they were expecting the assault to happen. Let's listen in to what one student had to say after the incident.
Wednesday morning, I went to the guidance counselor and told her since I was second on the hit list, knowing that there was something going to happen, because there was a girl she was targeting every day at lunch. And they would go to the counselor and tell them every day that this is going to happen. And Wednesday, I went with two others, and each of us filled out a whole paper full of what's going to happen and why it's going to happen. And then I went to chorus and I was told, watch your back. He is going to come for you and this other girl at lunch. And when I was at lunch, I was terrified. And I told Miss Fattori that that was happening. And she said, don't worry about it. It's not going to happen. But early that morning, I was told I was not going to see Mel for the rest of that week. But I was in lunch, and all of a sudden I just hear all this screaming and everybody running. And I see Mel running in after somebody, and everyone's screaming and running, but the girl who got attacked didn't see it because she was faced backwards, and all of a sudden you just hear these terrible, like, loud bangs of the Stanley bouncing off her head. And then you see Mel grabbing her hair and hitting her against the table and just repeatedly hitting her with the Stanley. There was blood going everywhere. I was the table right behind it, and all you see is blood everywhere. And it was just, and then you say in your email that it was 8 minutes, but we timed it. It was 28 minutes. And we had to sit in there and watch them clean up her blood off those tables and ground. And we had to watch them take her out with blood dripping down her face. And I will never forget that. And laying in bed last night, I just kept repeating it in my head. And we shouldn't have had to sit there and just watch that, watch them clean up her blood with the mop. Watch her repeatedly yelling that I'm going to murder you and just hitting her with the Stanley. And I don't get how, you couldn't have stopped it. It was 5 hours from when I told you it was going to happen and when it happened. It was 5 whole hours. I don't get how you couldn't have stopped that. And how Ms. Fattori said, don't worry, it's not going to happen. We have her under control. But clearly you didn't.
Just watching this video, it's just so sad to put yourself in their shoes and put yourself in and what they went through, of obviously for the victim, for her friends, for her classmates, the people who were putting efforts into preventing this from happening. And just hearing from this testimony, this was totally avoidable. So just through what I've been looking at, I have a theory of why I think this happened, of what I think the school did wrong that led to this terrible outcome. So one interesting piece of information that took me a bit to find is a key part of what led to this tragedy. Every time I read an article about this story, I noticed the avoidance of gendered language about the attacker. Neither he nor she was used to describe the assailant. And this is not typical. Usually, even when the identity is not revealed, there are some descriptive words used so you get some sense of the story. But it was obvious that this was intentional. So after reading a few articles, I found one that did state very clearly what was going on. The student, who is a boy, identifies as a girl. And here is not only a revealer of why this attack happened, but it's actually also a connection to 2034 cautionary tale. In this story, Georgiana is afraid of a student named Sammy S. and avoids all encounters with this student as much as possible. This aggravator in this fictional tale had troubled many students, and each one said they told the principal about it, but Sammy S. still roamed the hallways of school. When attempts were made to take the school to court over their exclusion of Sammy S., inclusivity was very important here. This real-life scenario is far different. A violent assault actually took place. This student, I don't think from what I read, had been at the school very long, and there were no threats of suing. However, there are some similarities between this real-life event and the book 2034. The students are walking the school in fear of an assault. Students are making reports of threats, but they are receiving no actual help. The student responsible for this attack is the one that seemingly holds the power. Why is this? Why would the school cater to the student making threats? Why would the school not at least have assigned a staff member to monitor that student for the duration of the day? It seems that action alone could have prevented this assault. I believe I know why. There are certain groups of students who are untouchable. Students who the school does not want to discipline in any way, not because they want to be noble and kind, but because they want to appear noble and kind. I have previously shared in other videos about schools that will not expel or suspend students in order to not appear racist. The same issue is happening with transgenderism. If a student is transgender and shows signs of aggression or violence, the school is afraid to appear transphobic by taking a strong stance against this behavior or threats of this behavior. The school at all costs wants to appear inclusive. Again, this is accommodating. In order to appear inclusive, the school is bending their own rules. The The schools have rules, they have policies and protections for students, but they're afraid to enforce them on certain groups of students. If you fall into the category of an untouchable, you have to do something violent to be punished. The threat is not enough. And this is not good enough for our students. Students shouldn't be going to school afraid of this type of an attack. Students shouldn't be going to schools with incompetent principals and leaders of their school who should be addressing issues that are brought up. These students did the right thing. They were trying to protect themselves and protect others, and it's the adults in the school that failed them. And again, this is why it's so important to talk about these issues, to talk about the reality, to talk about what's actually happening, and not just put on a facade to fake that we're being nice and that we love everyone when we're actually doing a disservice to people. We need to treat crimes as crimes. We need to treat threats as threats and not be accommodating and not giving this facade that we're showing compassion when what's actually happening is cruelty. Well, it's clear that we live in a crazy world. So I hope that you'll take the time to just invest in your community, those around you, just show some care, show some compassion, show someone that you love and appreciate them. Thanks for joining us, and remember to live in truth.